Welcome back to the channel and to the third part of the series that I'm doing about repairing the quilt that my grandmother made. I will try to focus on how I am attaching fabric to the quilt and then quilting on top of it. And just a quick disclaimer, there is a lot of boring hand sewing in this. So you may want to get a snack and a drink, or do your dusting while you're watching this, or vacuum during the long stretches. The first thing that I'm showing you is a block that I made and already attached, and now I am stitching X's in each one of the squares. Some colors of fabric are too dark for the marking pen to show up, so then I just pull the thread across and use that as a guide as I'm stitching. And I just have to tell you that I honestly don't set up my dog in every video, and it's a complete surprise to me when I go to edit that I find that she's perfectly in frame in about half of what I film. So it just makes me smile. I concentrate on trying to make nice even stitches on the front. And as you can see, I'm not as good of a quilter as my grandmother was. And on the back, it's pretty uneven and awful looking, but nobody will see it the way I'm going to finish it. Nobody will see what it looks like on the back. Once I get all of the top repair work done, then I plan on putting a new backing on it and then machine stitching that on. So the horrible stitching on the back will be covered. Here I'm using my disappearing ink pen and a ruler to mark out an X on the square that I'm going to be quilting on. Here, I've taken a piece of fabric and folded it over and pinned it to a damaged square of the quilt, and I'm stitching it on. I'm stitching it the same way I would if I were hemming a pair of pants or hemming a skirt or finishing a binding on a quilt. When I start patching a square onto another square, I usually start sewing halfway up so that I can later come back and tuck that bottom piece in. If you're wondering, the disappearing ink takes a couple of days to disappear. However, I've found if you get that area wet, it will reappear. I may have mentioned this before already, but I don't remember if it was in this video or a previous one. And you may be wondering why I'm not using an embroidery hoop to stitch these X's on these squares. And I would like to use an embroidery hoop because that would hold the fabric more taut, but I feel like with this older fabric that it's just too fragile and it would tear if I started messing too much with putting an embroidery hoop and moving it around on it. The fabric has held up really well for as old as it is. And when you consider that some of the squares might have been made out of clothing that had been worn before the quilt was even made, it's pretty incredible. That's just the way they did things back then. Okay, so moving on to the last square in this block, and I really thought I had some of the matching fabric left, but I can't find it. So I'm using the same color, only a different fabric. I'm going to try and show you in more detail and in a little slower fashion how to put the patch on so that it might be more clear to some people. I start by folding in the sides to the square of fabric over the place that I want to patch, making it even with the seam, and then pinning it in place. I then fold the top part of the square of fabric over, making it even with the seam and making sure everything's tucked in, and then pin that into place. You may have a different technique, but this is what works for me. If I am sewing on a block that's in the middle of the quilt, then I will start stitching halfway up the square. But since this is at the edge, I am going to start at the very bottom. Okay, so I came up underneath and I'm on the quilt, and then I'm just going to grab a tiny bit on the piece of fabric back on the quilt, grab a little piece of fabric, on the quilt, and then grab a piece of fabric, and I either stitch onto the bottom piece or the piece next to it, depending on whatever I feel like is the most stable. Trying not to take too big of stitches so that there won't be holes. Hello.
That was my beautiful and caring wife.
Here I have 3 squares in a row that need to be replaced. So I'm looking at my fabric, seeing which squares I have that look the best here. I measured the middle square so that I would know how much of a seam allowance to make. The top and the bottom squares, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to be folding those under when I hand sew them on the damaged pieces. The middle square in this patch only needs to be 2.5 inches with seam allowance and 2 inches once sewed. So I am cutting it down before I sew it. Using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I sew the pieces together. If you watched part 1 to this series, then you'll know that I marked all of the damaged squares with safety pins. And if the whole block needed to be replaced, then I put 2 safety pins in the middle. So here I'm just taking out the safety pins so that I can match up the new piece that I just made. I ironed this new piece after I sewed it, and then I also folded over the side and ironed it so that it would be easier to pin into place. And now I'm just matching up the seams and the corners, and it's a pretty good fit. I had to cut some of the excess fabric from the top and the bottom of the block as I was sewing it onto the quilt. As I was sewing the piece on, I realized that the 2 pieces next to it were also worn, so I made 2 more squares to go next to it. If I had it to do over again, I might not have used white fabric on this block. It's pretty stark against the old fabric. But that's what the original damaged piece was, so I thought it would be fine. And I actually think once I get it quilted, it will look a lot better. Right now it kind of stands out like a sore thumb. And I'm just marking the lighter squares with X's so that I can quilt them. On this block, I put the orange square of fabric over the damaged square, and then I also replaced the stitching in the middle yellow square because it had come out. Some of it had. Be sure and check out parts 1 and 2 of this series. I'll leave the links to those in the description box. And please like and subscribe if you like this video. And this is a full view of everything that I've repaired so far, just the bottom 2 rows. And it's taken me a couple of weeks, just mostly working on it in the evenings. If you're wondering about the uneven overhang on some of the blocks, when I trim the edges, I'll take care of that. So for now, I'm just leaving it until I get further along and trim the edges. I think it looks pretty good, and I'm pretty pleased with how it's turning out. Please check in occasionally for part 4 coming in the future. I hope you made it to the end of this video. If you did, comment in the comment section. And thanks for watching, and have a great day.